The Admiral's office smelled like old leather and decisions that ended careers. Commander Victoria Cress stood at attention before the mahogany desk, her dress blues crisp despite the humidity crawling through Coronado's afternoon air. She'd been summoned without explanation, pulled from a routine transport assignment that should have been beneath someone with her combat hours. Rear Admiral Nathaniel Vance didn't look up from the folder before him, and that silence stretched until it became its own kind of interrogation. "You flew Apache in Kandahar," he said finally, not a question. His eyes remained on whatever document held his attention. 63 combat missions, Distinguished Flying Cross. Then you resigned your commission and became a contractor pilot. The pause before contractor carried the weight of disappointment may be discussed. "Yes, sir." Victoria kept her voice level. She knew how this looked. War hero to civilian cargo hauler. She'd heard the whispers in every ready room since she'd taken the contract work. Single mother, couldn't hack it, lost her edge. The truth was more complicated and more boring than anyone wanted to believe. Her daughter Maya needed stability, and combat rotations weren't compatible with kindergarten pickup schedules. Vance closed the folder with deliberate precision. "Your husband was Lieutenant Commander James Cress, SEAL Team 7, KIA, Operation Mongoose Fury, February 2021. Again, not a question. "His unit is requesting something unusual, Commander. They want you." The words didn't make sense. James's team had moved on, reformed, deployed a dozen times since the ambush that took him. She'd attended the memorial service where hard men had wept into their hands, then she'd watched them disappear back into the classified darkness where SEALs lived. They didn't need her. They didn't need anyone who wasn't part of their brotherhood. "Sir, I don't understand." "Neither do I," Vance interrupted. His eyes finally met hers, and something moved behind them, something that looked almost like concern. "Master Chief Garza sent the request through unofficial channels, used the phrase Task Force Reaper. That designation doesn't exist in any database I can access, Commander, but someone very far above my pay grade authorized this conversation." Outside, an F-18 screamed overhead, the sound rattling the window panes. Victoria's hands remained at her sides, but her mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Task forces with no official existence meant operations that would never appear in any history book. It meant deniability. It meant people died in deserts whose names were classified, and their families got folded flags with stories that didn't quite add up. "What exactly is the request, sir?" she asked, though part of her already knew she wouldn't like the answer. The Admiral's expression confirmed it before he spoke. "They want you to fly them into something," Vance said quietly, "and they won't tell me where." The C-17 out of North Island carried cargo that didn't officially exist, bound for a destination redacted from the flight plan. Victoria sat in the cockpit's right seat, technically co-pilot but functionally just along for the ride. The pilot, a Air Force major named Rothstein with 20 years in transport, kept glancing at her like she might suddenly explain why a former combat aviator was deadheading to a forward operating base that wasn't on any map. She couldn't explain it because she didn't know. The orders had come through so fast she'd barely had time to arrange Maya's care. Her daughter had cried at the goodbye, old enough at 8 to understand that mommy's sudden trips to work carried weight, young enough to still believe promises about coming home safe. Victoria had held her tight and lied with a smile because that's what parents did. That's what soldiers did. The headset crackled. 30 minutes to LZ, Rothstein announced. "You ever been to this particular slice of nowhere?" "Never heard of it until yesterday." Victoria checked the coordinates they'd been given. Somewhere in the northern Kunar province, Afghanistan, remote even by Afghan standards, where remote meant hostile and hostile meant people died regularly. The area had been hot when James deployed there. It was probably still hot now, years later, because some fires never went out in that part of the world. Below them, the Hindu Kush mountains rose like the spine of a sleeping dragon, peaks still crowned with snow despite the season. beautiful and merciless. She'd flown this terrain before, hunting Taliban positions from an Apache's gun sight. The landscape didn't care about your politics or your grief. It just existed, ancient and patient, waiting for the next generation of warriors to bleed into its stones. The base emerged from the mountains like something carved by necessity rather than design. A strip of asphalt barely long enough for the C-17, surrounded by HESCO barriers and guard towers. No name visible, no flag, just utilitarian concrete and camouflage netting. Rothstein brought them in smooth, his experience evident in how the big transport kissed the runway without drama. "Good luck with whatever this is," he said as Victoria gathered her gear. "You seem like someone who doesn't need it, but I'll say it anyway." She nodded thanks and descended the cargo ramp into heat that hit like a physical force. The air tasted like dust and jet fuel, familiar in a way that made her chest tight. A Humvee waited at the edge of the tarmac, and standing beside it was a figure she recognized even after 4 years. Master Chief Marcus Garza hadn't aged so much as solidified. He looked like someone had carved a warrior from granite, then taught it to move. His face held the map of 100 operations, and his eyes carried the weight of the men he'd brought home and the ones he hadn't. James had called him Chief, with the kind of reverence most people reserved for prophets. "Commander Kress," Garza said, and the formality felt wrong, a barrier between them that shouldn't exist. "Chief," she replied, "you want to tell me what I'm doing here?" "Get in the vehicle." It wasn't harsh, but it wasn't a request either. Victoria climbed into the passenger seat, and Garza drove them away from the airstrip toward a cluster of buildings set against the mountain's face. Neither spoke. The silence carried too much history: James's funeral, the way Garza had pressed his trident into her hand, the unspoken promise that the Brotherhood would watch over her. They'd broken that promise by disappearing. Now they'd dragged her back into their world, and she wanted to know why. The Humvee stopped outside a prefab building distinguished only by the armed guards flanking its door. Inside, the air conditioning fought a losing battle against the heat. A conference room held 6 men, all of them familiar from memorial photos and Maya's bedtime stories. James's team, the ghosts she tried to leave behind. They stood when she entered, a gesture of respect that felt surreal. These were operators who'd killed men in 15 countries, who moved through the world like shadows with rifles. They stood for her like she was visiting royalty, and the absurdity of it made her want to laugh or scream. "Sit down," she said instead, and they did. Garza closed the door and the briefing began. The photographs spread across the conference table could have been abstract art if you didn't know what you were looking at. Black and white satellite imagery, thermal scans, drone footage shot from angles that turned familiar landscapes alien. Garza's finger traced a valley between 2 ridgelines, his voice flat with the professional distance operators used when discussing places where friends had died. "Operation Mongoose Fury was supposed to be a surgical extraction," he began. "High-value target, confirmed intelligence, in and out in 45 minutes. Your husband was team lead." Garza glanced at Victoria, checking if she needed him to stop. She kept her face neutral, so he continued. "The intelligence was good, too good. We walked into an ambush designed by someone who knew how SEALs operated." Victoria had heard the official story. Taliban fighters, superior numbers, James killed covering the team's withdrawal. Heroic last stand. There had been a flag ceremony and a citation written in language that sanitized violent death into patriotic sacrifice. She'd nodded through it all while part of her screamed that they were lying, that something about the story didn't fit the husband she'd known, the tactical genius who played chess 3 moves ahead and never walked into anything blind. "What didn't make the report," Garza said carefully, "was that 30 seconds before contact all our communications went dead. Not jammed, dead, like someone flipped a switch and erased us from the network." He pulled up another image, radio frequency analysis, classified stamps across the top. "We found the source 3 months ago. Russian signals intelligence unit embedded with local forces. They'd compromised our comms, fed us the target, knew our entire operational pattern. One of the other operators, a quiet sharpshooter James had called Preacher, spoke up. We spent 4 years tracking them. Every thread, every contact, every piece of equipment they used. Built a complete picture of their network. Then 2 weeks ago they went active again. Same signature, same valley. They're operating a forward intelligence post, collecting on NATO forces throughout the province. Victoria studied the men around the table. They looked tired in a way that went beyond missed sleep. This was the exhaustion of carrying ghosts, of debts unpaid and promises unkept. "You want to hit them," she said. Statement, not question. "We want to erase them," Garza corrected. "Every operator, every piece of equipment, every trace that they existed. Make it look like they vanished into the mountains." His eyes held hers. "But the approach is complicated. The valley's narrow, heavily defended, and their position is in terrain that makes conventional insertion suicide." Preacher slid another photo across the table. An old Russian Mi-8 helicopter, battered and patched, sitting at the base. That's theirs. They use it for resupply, bringing in equipment and rotating personnel. Flies the valley, run twice a week like clockwork because that's the only route that works. Understanding crystallized in Victoria's mind, cold and clear. "You want me to fly you in their helicopter?" The audacity of it was breathtaking. "You want to steal their bird, load it with a hit team, and fly directly into their compound?" "We've acquired an identical airframe," Garza said. "Same paint scheme, same serial numbers, even the same wear patterns on the fuselage. Sitting in a hangar at this base right now." He pulled up video footage of the helicopter in flight, filmed from a distance. "We've studied their flight patterns, their pilots' habits, even the radio chatter they use. We can replicate everything except one thing. We need someone who can fly Russian rotorcraft like they grew up in them, who can think on their feet when things go wrong, who understands combat aviation at an instinctive level." "And you thought of me because James bragged about my flying." Victoria kept her voice level despite the anger building in her chest. "This is insane. You're asking me to impersonate an enemy pilot, fly into a hostile position, and what? Drop you off and wait." "We're asking you," Garza said quietly, "because you're the only pilot we trust with this, because James trusted you with everything, including us, because you earned that distinguished flying cross-flying missions that should have killed you, and you brought everyone home every time." He leaned forward, and for the first time the professional mask cracked enough to show the grief underneath. "And because when he died we lost the best team lead we ever had. We owe him this. We owe you this." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Victoria looked at each face around the table, saw variations of the same desperate determination. They weren't asking her to fly them into danger. They were asking her to help them finally bury their dead, to complete the mission that had killed her husband, to turn grief into action, because action was the only language they spoke. "Show me the helicopter," she said. The hangar smelled like hydraulic fluid and secrets. The Mi-8 squatted in the center like a malevolent insect, its rotor blades drooping in a way that would have looked comical if the helicopter wasn't meant to carry them into enemy territory. Victoria walked around it slowly, running her hand along the battered fuselage, checking every detail against the photos she'd memorized. The Russians who maintained this bird had done so with vodka and profanity, leaving stress fractures and patch jobs that told stories of hard use and harder landings. "It's airworthy," said a voice behind her. Victoria turned to find a woman in civilian clothes, maybe 40, with the kind of eyes that suggested she'd spent years staring at technical manuals while people shot at her. "Mostly. I'm Alina Vasquez, former Army warrant officer, now independent contractor specializing in foreign aircraft systems. I've spent the last 6 months making this thing not a death trap." "Mostly airworthy isn't inspiring confidence," Victoria said, but she smiled. She liked people who spoke in honest assessments rather than optimistic lies. Alina shrugged. It's a 40-year-old Russian helicopter maintained by conscripts and flown by pilots who learned to fly in weather that kills American aviators for looking at it wrong. Mostly is generous. She gestured Victoria toward the cockpit. But it'll do what you need it to do. The engines are solid, the hydraulics don't leak more than spec, and I've personally verified every system that matters. It won't quit on you mid-flight. Probably. Victoria climbed into the pilot's seat, and muscle memory kicked in despite years away from Russian controls. She trained on Soviet-era aircraft during a cross-training program that seemed prescient now. The Soviets built helicopters like tanks, crude, heavy, and functional. Every switch, every gauge designed for pilots wearing gloves in freezing cockpits, checklists memorized because reading in combat would get you killed. Alina climbed into the co-pilot seat. Radio protocols are the tricky part. You'll be using their frequency, their call signs, their response patterns. We've got recordings of their actual pilots, voice analysis, everything. But if they suspect something's wrong and challenge you, she made a cutting gesture across her throat. The compound has SA-7 surface-to-air missiles. One suspicious transmission and you're falling out of the sky in pieces. Comforting. Victoria ran through the startup checklist, her hands finding controls they hadn't touched in years. The engines coughed, then roared to life with a sound like angry gods. The whole aircraft vibrated with barely contained violence. When's the timeline? 72 hours, Alina said. That's when the real Mi-8 makes its next supply run. You'll take off 30 minutes before them, fly the northern approach instead of their usual southern route, and arrive on schedule. They'll see what they expect to see, their helicopter on time, coming from a slightly different angle because weather or tactical considerations. By the time they realize something's wrong, the team will be in the compound. Victoria throttled down, letting the engine spool down to silence. 72 hours to prepare for a mission that violated international law, common sense, and her survival instinct. 72 hours to get comfortable with controls that might fail at altitude, radios that might betray her with a single wrong word, and the knowledge that if this went wrong, Maya would grow up with both parents killed in Afghanistan's mountains. Chief Garza said you don't have to do this, Alina added quietly. He made me promise to tell you that. There's no shame in walking away. These guys, they've made their peace with the risks. But you've got a daughter waiting at home. No one would blame you for saying no. Victoria thought about James's last message, sent from some dusty fire-base days before the mission that killed him. It hadn't said anything profound. Just love you. Tell Maya I'll bring her back a rock from the mountains. She still had that rock, sitting on Maya's dresser, gray stone shot through with veins of quartz. Her daughter talked to it sometimes, telling her father about school and friends and the things 8-year-olds found important. I'm flying, Victoria said. Not for them, not even for James, for Maya, so she grows up knowing her mother didn't leave debts unpaid. She met Alina's eyes. Now teach me how to sound like a Russian pilot who's bored with routine milk runs. The next 3 days blurred into technical preparation and tactical rehearsals. Victoria flew the Mi-8 on training runs through the surrounding mountains, getting a feel for how it handled in thin air, how it responded to sudden maneuvers, where its limitations would kill her if she forgot them. Alina rode along, calling out simulated emergencies while Victoria fought the controls. Engine failures, hydraulic leaks, sudden wind shear that tried to flip them inverted against cliff faces. By the 3rd day, Victoria could fly the helicopter while simultaneously running radio protocols in Russian, her accent polished until it matched the recordings of the enemy pilot she'd be impersonating. Garza's team rehearsed the insertion until every movement became choreographed muscle memory. They'd practiced boarding the helicopter in full combat load, moving with the silence that came from doing the same thing 1,000 times. They discussed contingencies, backup plans for the backup plans, the cold calculus of who got left behind if everything went to hell. Nobody argued about it. That's what made them professionals. They'd all been left behind before, in spirit if not body, and they all knew the mission came first. The night before the operation, Victoria sat alone in her quarters, staring at her phone. She'd recorded a video message for Maya, just in case. Tried to explain why Mommy had to do this thing she couldn't talk about. The words had come out wrong, too sentimental or not sentimental enough, and she deleted it. What did you say to your daughter if you weren't coming home? How did you compress years of love and guidance into 30 seconds of video that would haunt a child for the rest of her life? She left the message unsent. Either she'd come back and it wouldn't matter, or she wouldn't and no words would make that better. Dawn broke over the mountains like a wound, red and raw. Victoria stood beside the Mi-8, running her final pre-flight check while Garza's team loaded equipment into the cargo bay. They moved with practiced efficiency, each man responsible for specific gear, everything secured and cross-checked. Weapons, demolitions, communications equipment, medical supplies. The loadout of a team planning to fight their way out if the plan collapsed. Radio check, Alina's voice said in Victoria's headset. She was monitoring from the base's comm center, ready to feed Victoria intel and warnings if things went sideways. You're coming through clear. Russian frequencies are active but routine. Weather's in your favor, light winds, good visibility. The real Mi-8 is still grounded at their forward base, right on schedule. Victoria climbed into the pilot's seat, her body settling into the familiar discomfort of Russian ergonomics, designed for pilots smaller and more fatalistic than Americans. Garza took the jump seat directly behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence like a physical weight. The rest of the team strapped into the cargo bay, faces hidden behind balaclavas and night vision goggles pushed up on their helmets. "We're good to go," Garza said. No motivational speech, no final words, just professional acknowledgement that they were committed. Victoria brought the engines online, and the Mi-8 shuddered to life. She lifted off smooth, keeping the ascent gentle until they cleared the base perimeter. Then she turned north, following the flight plan they'd rehearsed until she could fly it with her eyes closed. The valley route took them between two ridgelines, following terrain that provided cover from radar and sightlines. Below, the ground dropped away into canyons where rivers carved paths older than human memory. 30 minutes to the turn, Alina updated. Still no change in enemy communications. You're invisible to them right now. The flight settled into routine, and that's when Victoria's mind betrayed her with memories she tried to bury. James in the kitchen of their first apartment, teaching her to make his grandmother's puzzle while rain hammered against windows. James holding Maya for the first time, tears streaming down his face as he whispered promises about protection and love. James the night before his last deployment, sitting on the edge of their bed at 3 a.m. because he couldn't sleep, admitting in a voice barely above a whisper that he was tired of watching good men die for objectives that changed with political winds. She'd told him to quit, transfer to training command, take a desk job, anything but another combat rotation. He'd smiled that sad smile operators got when civilians suggested the impossible. "I can't leave my guys," he'd said. "Who watches their backs if I'm not there?" Now those same guys sat behind her, trusting her with their lives because James had trusted her with his. The weight of it made her hands tighten on the controls. One mistake, one moment of hesitation or poor judgment, and she'd add more ghosts to the collection haunting Master Chief Garza's eyes. 10 minutes, Alina announced. "You're about to turn east and enter their operational area. From this point forward, you're committed. Radio protocol is active. You know the script." Victoria toggled to the Russian frequency and keyed the mic. "Raven 7 to base, approaching from the north, 10 minutes out." Her Russian carried the bored cadence of routine, a pilot who'd flown this route so many times it barely registered as dangerous. A crackle of static, then a response. "Raven 7, base copies. Weather is clear, winds light from the west. You are cleared for direct approach, landing pad 2. The voice on the other end sounded young, maybe mid-20s, someone doing radio watch duty while more important people planned operations that killed American soldiers. "Copy that, base." Victoria kept her voice neutral while her heart tried to punch through her ribs. They'd bought it. She was inside their security envelope now, a trusted asset arriving on schedule. The Mi-8 crested a final ridge, and the valley opened before them. The enemy compound sprawled below like a small fortress, command buildings surrounded by defensive positions, vehicles parked in careful dispersions that showed tactical sophistication. Radio antennas bristled from every building, the reason this position mattered. This was where they'd coordinated the ambush that killed James. This was where intelligence gathered from compromised American communications got processed and disseminated. This was ground zero for operations that would kill more soldiers if it kept operating. 2 minutes, Victoria said quietly, for Garza more than Alina. Behind her, she heard the soft clicks of weapons being readied, charging handles pulled back and released with the mechanical precision of men who could field-strip rifles in darkness. They were coiling like springs, ready to explode into violence the moment she set down. Raven 7, you are cleared to land. The radio voice still sounded bored, routine, just another day in their hidden war. Victoria brought the Mi-8 down in a textbook approach, flaring at the last moment to bleed off speed. The skids touched concrete with barely a bump. Professional. Perfect. Exactly what they expected from their regular pilot. Through the windscreen, she could see figures emerging from a nearby building, maybe 5 or 6 men in a mix of Russian military gear and local dress, coming to unload the supplies they thought she carried. Garza's hand touched her shoulder once briefly. Then he and his team were moving. The cargo door slammed open, and hell erupted into the valley's morning calm. The suppressed gunfire sounded like industrial staplers, rapid mechanical coughs that didn't match the violence they represented. Victoria stayed in the pilot's seat, hands on the controls, engines at idle, but ready to spool up if they needed emergency extraction. Through the windscreen, she watched Garza's team move like choreographed death. 2-man elements flowing through the compound, each pair covering the other in textbook CQB patterns that looked almost beautiful in their precision. The Russians coming to unload the helicopter died before they understood what was happening. Professional, clinical, no wasted movements or unnecessary risks. Garza's men were already past them, heading for the command building where radio antennas marked the intelligence center. Other SEALs peeled off toward defensive positions, eliminating sentries with the same mechanical efficiency. This wasn't combat. This was extermination, carried out with the cold competence of men who'd practiced this scenario until it became muscle memory. Contact north, Alina's voice crackled in Victoria's headset. Thermals picking up a patrol returning to the compound. 6 to 8 personnel, 5 minutes out. Victoria toggled to the team frequency. Chief, you've got company incoming from the north. 5 minutes. Copy that. Garza's voice was steady despite whatever violence he was prosecuting inside the building. Hold position. This won't take long. But it did take long. Every second stretched into subjective hours while Victoria watched the compound perimeter, knowing that at any moment, someone might realize the helicopter sitting on their landing pad wasn't their friendly supply bird. Her hands rested on the collective and cyclic, ready to yank the Mi-8 back into the air if the situation deteriorated beyond recovery. Through the cargo bay, she could see bodies lying where they'd fallen, spreading pools of blood, already attracting flies in the morning heat. Preacher emerged from the command building, moving backward while aiming his rifle at the doorway he just exited, covering someone still inside. Another operator followed, then Garza himself, backing out in a controlled fighting retreat. In Garza's arms, he carried what looked like a server unit, some piece of intelligence equipment they deemed valuable enough to extract rather than destroy. More SEALs appeared from other buildings, several carrying similar hardware, all of them moving toward the helicopter with practiced haste. 2 minutes, Alina updated. The patrol's moving faster, they might have heard something. Load up, Garza barked. His team flowed back into the cargo bay, taking positions that let them provide covering fire from the helicopter's doors. The last man in hit the bay twice with his palm, the signal they were loaded. Victoria was already pulling collective, lifting the Mi-8 off the landing pad before Garza could give the order. The helicopter clawed for altitude just as the returning patrol came into view around a compound building. Victoria caught a glimpse of confused faces looking up, seeing their helicopter departing unscheduled, men raising weapons in the confused hesitation of not knowing if they should fire on their own aircraft. Then Garza's team opened up from the cargo bay doors, and the patrol disappeared in a storm of carefully aimed fire. "Get us out of here," Garza said calmly, like he was ordering coffee. Victoria pushed the Mi-8 into a hard turn, banking away from the compound while simultaneously diving to gain speed. Behind them, someone in the compound finally understood what had happened. An alarm wailed, its sound Dopplering away as Victoria accelerated down the valley. The radio exploded with frantic Russian voices, confusion giving way to rage as they realized they'd been infiltrated and gutted. "Base, this is," someone started transmitting, but Alina cut them off. "Jamming active," she announced. "They can't call for help, you've got a clear run home." But nothing was ever that simple. Victoria's training screamed warnings even before her eyes confirmed the threat. A smoke trail arced up from the compound, gray-white contrail of a surface-to-air missile tracking toward them. SA-7, just like Alina had warned. Old Soviet technology, but old didn't mean ineffective against a helicopter this slow and heavy. "Sam, launch," she called out, already throwing the Mi-8 into an evasive maneuver that stressed the airframe past any official limit. The helicopter shuddered, complaining in metallic groans as she dove for the valley floor. Behind her, someone deployed flares, bright burning decoys meant to seduce the missile's heat-seeking guidance away from their engines. The missile chased them down the valley, its motor burning like a furious star. Victoria flew lower, forcing the Mi-8 between rock walls so narrow she could see individual boulders on the cliff faces. This was beyond textbook flying, beyond training, operating on pure instinct and the kind of desperation that made impossible maneuvers possible. The missile tried to follow, but its guidance system couldn't process the terrain fast enough. It impacted high on the canyon wall behind them, detonation echoing through the valley like thunder. "Holy hell," someone breathed in the cargo bay. Victoria didn't respond, too busy fighting controls that wanted to buck her into the canyon wall. The Mi-8 wasn't designed for this kind of flying. Russian helicopters were built for straight-line durability, not aerobatic maneuvers through terrain that killed eagles. But she kept it airborne through willpower and skill, riding the edge of disaster until the valley finally opened up and she could gain altitude. "All clear," Alina confirmed. "No pursuit, you're out of their engagement range." Victoria allowed herself one deep breath before resuming the flight profile that would take them home. Behind her, Garza's team was silent in the way of professionals who just watched death miss them by meters. Nobody celebrated yet. Celebration came after you landed, after you'd confirmed everyone made it back, after you could finally believe you'd survived. The flight back took 37 minutes that felt like hours. Victoria flew on autopilot, her conscious mind disconnected from her hands on the controls, watching the mountains slide past while she processed what she'd just done. She'd impersonated an enemy pilot, flown into a hostile compound, and extracted a strike team after they'd killed every Russian in that valley. This was the kind of operation that would never be acknowledged, that would remain classified until everyone involved was dead. She'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, and done it without hesitation because Garza had asked, and she owed James's memory something more than grief. The forward base appeared ahead, ugly and functional, and the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Victoria brought the Mi-8 down onto the tarmac with a landing so gentle it barely kissed the concrete. Engines spooling down, rotors slowing. The moment between action and aftermath, where reality reasserted itself and the body remembered it was supposed to be terrified. Garza was first out of the cargo bay, and he came around to the pilot's door before Victoria could climb down. When she finally emerged on shaking legs, he was there, steady as stone, his eyes carrying something she hadn't seen in them before. Not pity, not gratitude exactly, something closer to recognition. "James was right about you," Garza said quietly. "He said you were the best pilot he'd ever seen, that you could fly through hell if you had to." His hand extended. "Welcome to Task Force Reaper, Commander. You're one of us now." Victoria took his hand, feeling calluses built from years of violence in service of objectives she'd probably never fully understand. "Does that come with a call sign?" she asked, surprised at the steadiness in her own voice. "It does," Garza replied. "The team's been calling you Valkyrie seemed appropriate." He released her hand and stepped back. "There'll be a debrief, then extraction back to the States. After that," he shrugged, "we'll be in touch when we need you, and we will need you. This war isn't over just because we won this fight." Victoria nodded, too exhausted to argue, too wired to rest. Around her, the team was unloading equipment with the same calm efficiency they'd used loading it, like nothing unusual had happened, like they hadn't just executed an operation that rewrote rules about deniability and international law. Elena appeared from the comm center, gave Victoria a thumbs up that carried the weight of professional respect, then disappeared back inside. By nightfall, Victoria was on a transport back to North Island, the mission already fading into the classified limbo where operations like this lived. She checked her phone immediately after landing to find messages from Maya, school gossip, requests for help with homework, the mundane, beautiful life that continued regardless of what Victoria did in distant mountains. She responded with normal mom replies, keeping her voice steady through text, giving nothing away about how the day had carved something new inside her chest. The aircraft's drone wrapped around her like white noise, and Victoria finally let herself sleep. She dreamed of helicopters and mountains, of James smiling in their kitchen, of Garza's hand on her shoulder in silent communion. She dreamed of being Valkyrie, the chooser of the slain, carrying warriors to their final battles. When she woke over dark ocean, the dream faded but the name remained, settling onto her shoulders with the weight of expectation and belonging. She was part of Task Force Reaper now. The ghosts had claimed her. And somewhere deep in her chest, in a place she couldn't quite access yet, Victoria realized she was okay with that. 2 months passed in the illusion of normalcy. Victoria returned to her contractor job flying cargo routes that bored her into contemplating career changes. Maya finished third grade with a report card that required serious discussion about applying oneself rather than coasting on native intelligence. The house needed repairs Victoria kept postponing. Life continued in its mundane forward momentum, and the operation in the Afghan mountains took on the quality of a fever dream, something that might not have really happened. Then the phone rang at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Victoria knew before answering that normalcy had been temporary. "Valkyrie," Garza's voice, no greeting, no preamble. "We've got a situation developing in Yemen. How fast can you be wheels up from North Island?" Victoria sat up in bed, already mentally running through logistics. Maya was at her grandmother's for summer vacation. The house was secured. Her go-bag stayed packed in the closet for exactly this kind of call. 12 hours, she said. "What's the mission?" "Briefing when you arrive. But Valkyrie," Garza paused. "Pack for hot weather and hostile territory. This one's going to be complicated." The line went dead. Victoria dressed in darkness, moving through the routine she developed over years of emergency deployments. Secure the house. Leave instructions for bill payments and yard maintenance. Pack the bag with clothing that wouldn't stand out in the Middle East. Check weapons permits and documentation that cleared her to travel with specialized equipment. All the small arrangements that let soldiers pretend they were coming home. North Island looked different at dawn. the same base transformed by context into something new. She wasn't arriving for routine transport work now. She was answering a summons from an organization that officially didn't exist, to fly missions that would never be acknowledged. The guard at the gate checked her ID with extra scrutiny, made a phone call, then waved her through with a look that said he didn't want to know what she was doing here. Garza met her in the same hangar where the Mi-8 had squatted months ago. Now the space held a different aircraft, a civilian helicopter, Bell 407, painted in the colors of an international aid organization. It looked innocent, the kind of bird that delivered medical supplies to remote villages. Victoria knew immediately that innocence was the point. "Yemen's collapsing," Garza said without preamble, walking her toward a briefing room adjacent to the hangar. Government forces, Houthi rebels, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Southern separatists, and about 6 other factions all fighting for control while the civilian population starves. Into this mess, some brilliant State Department analyst decided to send a cultural liaison team to facilitate humanitarian corridors. Inside the briefing room, photos covered every wall. Maps of Yemen marked with colored pins representing different factions, population centers, supply routes. Satellite imagery of mountain strongholds and coastal cities reduced to rubble. In the center of it all, one photo showed a woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled back, eyes carrying the determination of someone who'd spent decades believing diplomacy could solve everything. Dr. Sarah Pemberton, Garza continued, former ambassador, current State Department special envoy, and currently missing along with her security detail somewhere in the Haraz Mountains. Her last transmission came 26 hours ago from a village that's now a contested zone between government forces and AQAP fighters. He turned to Victoria. "We need to get her out before either side realizes they've got a high-value hostage who could be leveraged for ransom or propaganda." Victoria studied the map. The Haraz Mountains were terrain even worse than Afghanistan, higher altitude, more isolated, controlled by people who'd been fighting civil wars since before she was born. Flying into that in an unarmed civilian helicopter was suicide unless you had perfect intelligence and flawless execution. "What's the cover story?" she asked, because operations like this always needed cover stories, plausible deniability that held up under international scrutiny. "Or with Mercy Medical International, a relief organization delivering supplies to mountain villages," Garza said. "You've got legitimate cargo, legitimate flight plans and paperwork that'll survive inspection. The team will be disguised as security contractors, which isn't unusual for aid groups working in conflict zones. We fly in, locate Pemberton, extract her under the cover of providing medical evacuation for a sick villager, and fly out before anyone realizes what happened. And if anyone realizes what's happening before we extract." Victoria kept her voice level, but they both knew the question's real weight. "Then you fly like you did in Afghanistan," Garza said simply, "and we trust that Valkyrie doesn't leave people behind." The mission launched at sunset, golden light turning the ocean to molten copper as they flew east. Victoria handled the Bell 407 with the same precision she'd applied to every aircraft she'd ever flown, but this bird felt different. Lighter, more responsive, like flying a sports car after years of military trucks. The team sat behind her in civilian clothes that didn't quite hide their operator postures, trying to look like contractors but moving like the combat veterans they were. Alina's voice came through the headset, monitoring from some operations center continents away. "You're cleared through Saudi airspace. Weather's cooperating. Intelligence assets show limited activity in your landing zone, but the area's fluid. Things could change fast." "Story of my life," Victoria murmured, not keying the mic. The flight across dark water felt eternal, but eventually the Saudi coast materialized ahead, then the border crossing into Yemen. Victoria followed the approved flight plan exactly, knowing that deviating would draw attention from people who shot first and investigated later. The country below looked peaceful from altitude, scattered lights marking villages, dark expanses of mountain wilderness, the illusion of a land at rest rather than tearing itself apart. 30 minutes to LZ, Victoria announced. Behind her, the team began final preparations, checking equipment, reviewing the extraction plan one more time. Preacher sat closest to the cockpit and Victoria caught him checking a photo on his phone, woman and 2 kids, probably his family, the thing he was fighting to get home to. Everyone carried these talismans, proof that life existed beyond the mission's boundaries. The village appeared where intelligence said it would be, a cluster of stone buildings clinging to a mountainside like barnacles on a ship. Victoria circled once, low enough to see people emerging from houses to stare at the helicopter, high enough to assess threats. No obvious weapons, no military vehicles, just the watchful wariness of people who'd learned that anyone could be dangerous. She sat down in a clearing that served as the village square, the Bell's skids kissing dirt while rotors kicked up dust that obscured everything. Garza and his team were out before the dust settled, moving with the confidence of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Victoria stayed at the controls, watching the tree line, the rooftops, anywhere threats might emerge. 5 minutes. That's all they were supposed to need. 5 minutes to locate Pemberton, confirm she was mobile, and get her back to the helicopter. Victoria counted seconds in her head while monitoring the radio for any traffic that indicated someone had noticed their presence. The village seemed suspended in time, people watching from doorways without approaching, neither hostile nor welcoming, just waiting. Garza's voice crackled in her headset. "We've got her. She's mobile but weak, coming to you now." Relief flooded through Victoria's chest, but she forced it down. They weren't extracted yet. Still vulnerable, still in hostile territory, still 100 things that could go wrong. The team emerged from a stone house, supporting Dr. Pemberton between 2 operators. Even from distance, Victoria could see the ambassador looked rough, dehydrated, maybe injured, moving with the careful stiffness of someone pushing through pain. But she was alive and moving. That's all that mattered. Then the radio traffic changed. Alina's voice, sharp with urgency, multiple vehicles approaching from the south, technicals with mounted weapons. ETA 3 minutes, you need to lift off now. Load up, Victoria called, already spooling the engines up to full power. Garza's team moved faster, but there's only so fast you can move when carrying an exhausted diplomat up a mountain slope toward a helicopter. Victoria watched the southern approach, saw dust rising in the distance, the telltale sign of multiple vehicles moving fast. The team reached the helicopter with seconds to spare. Garza literally threw Pemberton into the cargo area, then dove in behind her while his operators laid down suppressing fire toward the approaching vehicles. Victoria didn't wait for confirmation that everyone was aboard. She pulled collective and twisted throttle simultaneously, demanding power the Bell delivered with a turbine scream that overrode every other sound. The helicopter clawed skyward while gunfire crackled from below. Rounds snapped past the fuselage, that distinctive crack of bullets passing close enough to feel. Victoria jinked hard left, then right, making them a difficult target while gaining altitude as fast as the aircraft would allow. Below, the technicals, pickup trucks with machine guns mounted in their beds, converged on the village square they just vacated. "Everyone intact?" Victoria demanded, still climbing, still maneuvering. "We're good," Garza confirmed. "Pemberton's stable. Get us across the border." The flight back felt longer than the insertion, every minute expecting surface-to-air missiles or interceptor aircraft that never came. Eventually they crossed back into Saudi airspace, then out over water toward a Navy ship positioned for exactly this kind of extraction. Victoria landed on the destroyer's deck with the sun rising behind them, painting the sky in colors that promised a new day despite everything. Dr. Pemberton was hustled below decks by Navy corpsmen. Garza's team began the mission debrief that would turn tonight's operation into official after-action reports. And Victoria sat in the pilot's seat watching the ocean, feeling the adrenaline drain away and leave exhaustion in its place. Garza appeared beside the helicopter, leaning against the fuselage. "Another successful operation for Valkyrie," he said. "The State Department's already composing thank you letters they can never send to people who officially weren't there." "I wasn't there," Victoria agreed. "Just a civilian contractor who happened to be in the area." "Right," Garza smiled, tired but genuine. "You heading home?" "Yeah." Victoria unbuckled from the seat, feeling every hour of the mission in her joints. "Maya's expecting me back by Friday. I've got time to sleep, shower, and remember how to be a normal person." "You were never normal," Garza said. "James knew that, that's why he loved you." He paused, then added quietly, "You know this is what he did, right? All those deployments, all the time away from you and Maya. He was saving people, making impossible extractions happen because someone had to, and he was good at it." Victoria nodded, understanding settling into her chest. She'd spent 4 years resenting James's choices, feeling abandoned by his dedication to the Brotherhood. But now, carrying that same weight herself, she finally understood. You didn't do this for glory or acknowledgement. You did it because someone needed to, and you had the skills to make the impossible work. "Tell me when you need Valkyrie again," she said. "I'll be there." The calls came regularly after that, every few months bringing new impossible missions in distant places. Victoria flew throughout the Middle East, Africa, occasionally Central Asia, always under cover of civilian operations, always extracting assets or striking targets that required deniability. She became known, not publicly, never publicly, but within the classified community where reputation mattered more than rank. When someone needed a pilot who could fly anything anywhere under any conditions, they requested Valkyrie. Maya grew up understanding that sometimes Mom went away on short notice and came back tired but never discussed where she'd been. They developed codes, certain phrases that meant mission was hard but I'm okay, others that indicated need to talk to your grandmother about feelings I can't help with right now. It wasn't perfect parenting, but it was honest in the way military families understood honesty. You did what you had to do, and you loved each other through the complications. Victoria's reputation brought other changes. Job offers from defense contractors who wanted her name attached to their bids, speaking invitations at aviation conferences, which she declined because Valkyrie didn't do public appearances. Quiet respect from people who knew what she did but couldn't say how they knew. She turned down everything except the missions, staying focused on the only thing that mattered, being available when Garza called. It was 3 years into her time with Task Force Reaper when the call came that changed everything. Not Garza this time, but Alina, her voice carrying tension that immediately put Victoria on alert. "We've got a problem," Alina said without preamble. "Garza's team is compromised in Syria. 8 operators, surrounded by hostile forces in a town called Al-Shafa. They're out of ammunition, casualties, and the only extraction corridor is through an active combat zone that regular assets can't reach. They're calling for Valkyrie." Victoria was already moving toward her closet, pulling out the go bag that never fully got unpacked anymore. "What's the timeline?" 12 hours before the enemy overruns their position," Alina said. "But it's complicated. You'd be flying into Syrian airspace without authorization, using an aircraft that'll be shot down if anyone realizes it's American. This isn't Afghanistan or Yemen. This is direct confrontation with Russian air defense systems, Syrian government forces, and multiple militant groups all competing for the propaganda value of killing American operators." "So it's Tuesday," Victoria said, and despite the situation, Alina laughed. "Yeah, Tuesday. There's a Black Hawk staged at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. It's marked as Turkish military, false transponder codes, everything you need to spoof your way across the border. But Valkyrie, if you get shot down, the government will deny everything. You'll be dead in a country that hates us, and Maya will grow up with both parents killed in operations that officially never happened." Victoria paused in her packing, thinking about her daughter asleep in the next room. 13 now, starting to understand that Mom's contractor work meant something more than normal civilian jobs. Smart enough to worry, old enough to deserve honesty. Victoria had promised herself she'd never leave Maya alone, that she'd always come home no matter what. But Garza was surrounded, Preacher and the others, men who'd fought beside James, who'd helped Victoria become something more than a grieving widow, men who'd trusted her with their lives repeatedly, never once doubting that Valkyrie would be there when they needed her. The Brotherhood didn't ask questions like, "Is this worth it?" They asked, "Can you do it?" and assumed the answer was yes. "I'm wheels up in 6 hours," Victoria said. "Send me the coordinates and everything you've got on the tactical situation." Already on its way, Alina's voice softened. "Be careful. James made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I'd watch out for you. This mission, it's the kind that breaks that promise." "Then I better not get broken," Victoria replied, and ended the call before emotion could complicate action. The flight to Turkey took forever despite moving at hundreds of miles per hour. Victoria used the time reviewing intelligence reports, studying maps of Al-Shafa until she could navigate the streets in darkness. The town had been contested for years, changing hands between ISIS, Syrian government forces, and various rebel groups so many times that the buildings were more rubble than structure. Perfect terrain for an ambush. Terrible terrain for extraction. At Incirlik, the Black Hawk waited exactly as Alina promised. Turkish markings, but the maintenance crew's body language screamed American military trying to look Turkish. Victoria didn't comment on the theater. She just ran through pre-flight checks with a thoroughness that bordered on paranoia, because this aircraft was going into conditions that would test every system beyond rated limits. "You're cleared for immediate departure," said a crew chief who carefully didn't introduce himself. "Flight plan has you conducting reconnaissance along the border. If anyone asks, you got lost." "Lost," Victoria repeated, "in a combat zone with perfect navigation systems." "It happens," the crew chief said with a completely straight face. "Especially to pilots as skilled as you, who definitely wouldn't intentionally violate international airspace to conduct unauthorized military operations." Victoria appreciated people who could maintain plausible deniability while acknowledging reality. She climbed into the cockpit and brought the Black Hawk online, feeling the familiar thrum of American engineering, so different from the Russian birds she'd learned to fly. This was precision and power, technology designed to keep pilots alive through situations that should kill them. The border crossing happened in darkness, Victoria flying low enough to feel the terrain more than see it. Syrian air defenses were sophisticated enough to track her if she got careless, so she used every terrain feature as cover, following wadis and staying below ridge lines, becoming one more shadow in a landscape full of shadows. Alina monitored from whatever operations center she worked from, feeding Victoria updates on enemy positions and Garza's deteriorating situation. "They're in a building's basement, northeast corner of town," Alina reported. "2 wounded, 1 critical. Enemy forces are conducting building-to-building clearing operations, methodical and thorough. You've got maybe an hour before they're discovered." "Then I better be fast," Victoria said, pushing the Black Hawk faster despite the risk of detection. Every minute mattered now. Every second delayed meant friends died in a basement while waiting for rescue that might not arrive. Al-Shafa appeared ahead, burning. Fires from recent combat painted the night orange, and tracer rounds arced through darkness as different factions fought each other with the intensity of old grudges. Victoria identified the extraction point, a building somehow still mostly intact despite surrounding devastation, marked by an IR strobe visible only through night vision. Garza had maintained perimeter security long enough to mark the LZ. She brought the Black Hawk in fast and hard, flaring at the last second to bleed speed, touching down in a courtyard barely large enough for the helicopter's footprint. Immediately, the cargo doors were yanked open from outside. Garza's team emerging from the basement like ghosts, carrying their wounded, moving with the desperate efficiency of people who knew this was their last chance. But they weren't alone. Gunfire erupted from surrounding buildings, muzzle flashes lighting up windows and doorways. The enemy had spotted them, and now everyone was converging on this position. Victoria kept the Black Hawk at maximum power, ready to lift off the instant everyone was aboard, while rounds spanged off the fuselage and shattered windows. "Go, go, go!" Garza was screaming, loading the wounded first, then his able-bodied operators, everyone moving with practiced speed despite chaos. Victoria counted heads through the rearview, trying to verify everyone was aboard while simultaneously monitoring the tactical situation deteriorating around them. 7-8, that was everyone. "We're loaded," Garza shouted. Victoria pulled collective and twisted throttle, demanding everything the Black Hawk could give. The helicopter clawed skyward while the town below erupted in sustained fire. Something hit the tail rotor. Victoria felt it through the controls. A shudder that meant damage, meant they were flying wounded now. She compensated, adjusting pedal pressure to maintain directional control, but the aircraft wanted to spin, and keeping it straight required constant input. "Tail rotors damaged," she reported, voice steady despite adrenaline screaming through her veins. "I've got control, but it's degrading. We need to reach friendly airspace before it fails completely." Behind her, Preacher was working on the critically wounded operator, hands slick with blood, praying in whispered Spanish while trying to stop hemorrhaging that wouldn't stop. The other wounded man was conscious, gritting his teeth against pain, refusing morphine because he wanted to stay alert if they crashed. Soldiers stayed professional even when dying, because training ran deeper than fear. Alina's voice crackled in Victoria's headset. "You've got company. Syrian helicopters vectoring toward your position. 2 Mi-24s armed and hostile, ETA 4 minutes. Perfect. Damaged helicopter, wounded aboard, enemy gunships inbound, and still 20 miles from friendly airspace." This was exactly the kind of situation that ended with wreckage scattered across Syrian desert and 8 names added to classified casualty lists. But Victoria had flown through worse. She'd survived the Mi-8 mission in Afghanistan when every factor said she should have died. She was Valkyrie, and Valkyries didn't abandon the slain. "Hold on," she said calmly, and pushed the damaged Black Hawk toward its absolute limits. The next 4 minutes became a masterclass in emergency aviation. Victoria flew the helicopter like it was an extension of her body, compensating for the degrading tail rotor through constant minute adjustments, maintaining just enough altitude to avoid terrain while staying low enough to complicate the enemy's targeting solutions. The Syrian Mi-24s were faster, better armed, flown by pilots who'd survived years of civil war. But they were hunting an opponent who'd learned to fly from the best combat aviators in American military history, and who'd refined those lessons through missions that should have been impossible. "They're locking up," Alina warned. "Missiles active, you need to evade now." Victoria threw the Black Hawk into a brake turn that stressed the damaged tail rotor past any safe limit. The helicopter shuddered, wanting to come apart, held together by engineering tolerances and Victoria's sheer refusal to let it fail. Behind them, missiles scorched through the night sky, tracking heat signatures and radar returns. Victoria deployed flares in a pattern designed to seduce the missiles away from the helicopter, then dove for the ground so fast that several people in back screamed involuntarily. One missile decoyed away. The other kept tracking, closing the distance with mechanical inevitability. Victoria pulled the Black Hawk through a maneuver that should have been aerodynamically impossible, using terrain to mask their heat signature at the last possible second. The missile impacted a ridge behind them, detonation close enough to rock the helicopter with concussive force. "I'm into Turkish airspace," Victoria shouted, more for herself than anyone else. "We're across, we made it." The Syrian helicopters broke off pursuit at the border, not willing to create an international incident by violating Turkish sovereignty. Victoria maintained her heading, climbing now that she had room, aiming for Incirlik and safety, and the moment she could finally stop flying on adrenaline and prayer alone. "Status back there?" she asked, needing to know, dreading the answer. Preacher's voice came back, tired and sad. "Santiago didn't make it. He was gone before we loaded, just didn't know it yet. Everyone else is stable. You got us out, Valkyrie. You brought us home." But not all of them. One more ghost to add to the collection. One more name on a list of people who died in operations that officially never happened. Victoria felt it settle onto her shoulders with familiar weight, the cost of being someone people called when situations became impossible. The landing at Incirlik happened in sunrise, golden light turning the base beautiful despite everything. Medical personnel swarmed the Blackhawk the moment Victoria shut down the engines, extracting the wounded and the dead with practiced efficiency. Garza emerged last, moving stiffly, blood on his uniform that might have been his or might have been Santiago's. He came around to the pilot's door where Victoria still sat, hands locked on controls she couldn't quite make herself release. "Another successful operation for Valkyrie," Garza said quietly, and Victoria heard the question underneath the statement. "Are you okay? Can you keep doing this? Do you regret answering when I called?" "I need a minute," Victoria said, and Garza nodded, understanding that some things couldn't be rushed. He walked away, leaving her alone in the cockpit while the sun climbed higher, and the day began for people who hadn't spent the night extracting warriors from impossible situations. Victoria finally released the controls and climbed down on shaking legs. She'd saved 7 men and lost 1, and the mathematics of that exchange would haunt her for weeks. But she'd answered when called. She'd been there when the Brotherhood needed Valkyrie, and she'd brought them home, or as close to home as warriors like them ever got. That's what being Valkyrie meant. Not choosing who lived or died, but fighting like hell to make sure the living outnumbered the dead. Doing it again and again, accumulating scars and ghosts because someone had to and you were good at it. James had understood that. Now Victoria did too. She pulled out her phone and texted Maya, "Coming home soon. Love you." Simple words that meant everything. That promised despite impossible missions and terrible odds, she'd always find a way back to what mattered most. The reply came instantly, "Love you too, Mom, be safe." Too late for that, Victoria thought, but she'd be there. That was the promise Valkyrie kept, even when keeping it cost everything else. 5 years became Victoria's identity as Valkyrie. Not her only identity. She remained Maya's mother, attended parent-teacher conferences and school plays, maintained the fiction of a normal civilian life. But increasingly, the person who flew impossible missions felt more real than the person who pretended that flying cargo routes satisfied her. The truth was that Task Force Reaper had given her something she hadn't known she needed. Purpose beyond survival, connection beyond grief, a way to honor James's memory that meant more than keeping his photo on the mantle. The missions blurred together after Syria. Extraction in Somalia where local militia had captured NGO workers. Reconnaissance flight over North Korean positions that officially never happened, but provided intelligence that prevented an artillery strike on Seoul. Infiltration into Venezuela to extract a compromised intelligence asset before government forces disappeared him. Every mission added layers to Valkyrie's legend within the classified community. The pilot who could fly anything anywhere, who didn't flinch when things went sideways, who brought people home against odds that should have been impossible. But legends accumulated weight. Every successful mission meant more people knew about Valkyrie, more commanders considered her for operations that pushed boundaries further. The calls came more frequently. The missions grew more dangerous, pushing into territories and situations that made early operations seem tame by comparison. Victoria found herself accepting missions she once would have considered suicidal, because people were counting on her, because Garza's team needed her, because being Valkyrie meant not questioning whether something could be done but simply doing it. Maya turned 16 watching her mother slowly transform into someone else. They fought about it sometimes. Careful arguments where Maya accused Victoria of caring more about work than family. And Victoria couldn't explain that work meant keeping people alive. That family meant understanding sometimes you had to risk everything to protect people who protected others. The disconnect grew until they stopped arguing and just existed in parallel, loving each other, but unable to bridge the gap between civilian understanding and operational necessity. Then came the mission that broke everything. The call came during Maya's 16th birthday party, dozens of teenagers eating cake in their backyard, while Victoria's phone vibrated with Garza's distinctive pattern. She should have ignored it, should have let it go to voicemail and called back after the party ended. But habits developed over 5 years were hard to break, and she stepped inside to take the call while Maya blew out candles and made wishes her mother wouldn't hear. "Valkyrie, we need you now." Garza's voice carried urgency that made Victoria's stomach drop. Major hostage situation developing in Lagos, Nigeria. 26 American missionaries taken by Boko Haram, being transported toward the Cameroon border. Nigerian military has assets in position to intercept, but they need American support to coordinate the operation. State Department's asking for you specifically. "Chief, I can't." The words felt wrong leaving her mouth, felt like betrayal. "It's Maya's birthday. I promised I'd be here. I can't just—" "They're going to execute them," Garza interrupted. Boko Haram's made it clear. 26 Americans, including 8 children, killed on camera unless their demands are met. Demands we can't meet because they're designed to be impossible. You're the only pilot in theater who has experience coordinating hostage rescue operations. Without you, those people die. Victoria looked through the window at her daughter surrounded by friends, laughing at something someone said, beautiful and happy and utterly unaware that her mother was about to break another promise. How many promises had she broken over 5 years? How many times had Maya heard, "I'll be there," followed by "something came up at work"? At what point did being a good soldier make you a bad mother? "How long?" Victoria asked, knowing she'd already made the decision, hatting herself for it. 72 hours, maybe less. In and out, simple coordination role. You'll be back before she knows you're gone. But Maya knew. When Victoria went outside to make her excuses, "Work emergency, can't be avoided, so sorry honey," her daughter's face went carefully blank, the expression teenagers used when they'd stopped expecting better. "It's fine," Maya said with a voice that meant it wasn't fine at all. "Go save the world or whatever." Victoria wanted to explain. Wanted to say that 26 people would die if she didn't go, that among them were children Maya's age, that sometimes being a parent meant making terrible choices between competing obligations. But Maya had already turned away, back to her friends, shutting Victoria out with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned that hopping for different outcomes led to disappointment. The mission to Nigeria should have been straightforward. Victoria flew in as a State Department liaison, coordinated between Nigerian military forces and a small American advisory team, helped plan the intercept operation using her experience with hostage rescue procedures. She wasn't supposed to be in danger, wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the actual rescue attempt. She was just there to facilitate communication and provide expertise. But battlefield plans collapsed the moment they encountered reality. The Nigerian convoy got ambushed en route to the intercept point, pinned down by Boko Haram fighters who somehow knew exactly where they'd be and when. The American advisory team couldn't establish communications with the convoy. Radio frequencies were being jammed, and nobody could coordinate the rescue attempt without someone physically present at both locations. "I can do it," Victoria said before anyone asked. "Put me in a helicopter. I'll fly to the convoy, establish communications, coordinate the rescue from there." "Ma'am, that's not your job," protested the Army captain commanding the advisory team. "We can wait for—" "For what?" "For those missionaries to be executed while we discuss chain of command." Victoria was already moving toward the helicopter assigned to the operation, a Nigerian Air Force bird maintained to standards that made her nervous. You need someone who can fly combat missions and coordinate rescue operations simultaneously. That's literally what I do. They let her go because they had no better options, because situations got desperate enough that everyone started improvising, because Victoria projected the confidence of someone who'd survived worse and would survive this too. She flew toward the convoy alone, following coordinates transmitted in bursts between jamming pulses, navigating toward gunfire she could hear before she could see it. The convoy was taking fire from three sides when she arrived, Nigerian soldiers pinned behind vehicles while Boko Haram fighters closed the noose. Victoria established communications, started coordinating the response, calling in supporting elements, directing fire, organizing the chaos into something resembling a plan. It was working. They were gaining control of the situation. The missionaries were still alive in a truck at the convoy's center. Then a rocket-propelled grenade streaked toward her helicopter, and Victoria's world exploded into fire and pain, and the realization that she'd broken her promise to Maya one final time. Consciousness returned in fragments. Pain first, everywhere and specific simultaneously. Smoke smell. Someone screaming, maybe her. Hands pulling her from wreckage while gunfire continued around them. Nigerian soldiers dragging her away from the burning helicopter, carrying her toward cover while she tried to remember why she was here, what mission had brought her to this place where helicopters burned and people died. Valkyrie, someone was shouting into her face, and eventually she recognized Garza. When had Garza arrived? Stay with me. Medical evacuation inbound. You're going to be fine. She wasn't fine. Victoria knew enough about traumatic injuries to recognize that the pain in her legs meant something bad, that the difficulty breathing meant worse. She tried to speak, but blood filled her mouth, turning words into coughs that hurt more than anything should hurt. The missionaries, she managed eventually. Did we? All rescued, Garza confirmed. 26 people going home because you coordinated that rescue. You did it, Valkyrie. Mission complete. Mission complete. People saved. Success measured in lives preserved against impossible odds. But Victoria's mind wasn't celebrating. It was thinking about Maya, about the birthday party she'd abandoned, about the promise broken, and the look on her daughter's face when Victoria chose strangers over family one more time. Maya, she whispered, tell her. You'll tell her yourself, Garza said firmly. Medical's almost here. You're going home. The evacuation happened in blurs separated by unconsciousness. Hospital in Lagos, surgery to stabilize her condition, military transport to Germany, more surgery. Eventually, a hospital room at Walter Reed in Maryland where she woke to find Maya sitting beside the bed, eyes red from crying, holding her mother's hand like she was afraid letting go meant losing her forever. Hey baby, Victoria said, voice raspy from intubation. Sorry I missed your party. Maya laughed, but it came out broken, more sob than humor. Mom, you almost died. You almost died doing something you wouldn't even tell me about because it's classified. I had to learn you were hurt from a Navy officer who showed up at Grandma's house and wouldn't explain what happened. Do you understand how terrifying that was? Victoria wanted to explain, wanted to justify 5 years of missions, of choosing the brotherhood over family, of believing she could be both Valkyrie and Maya's mother without sacrificing either identity. But lying in this hospital bed, feeling where the RPG shrapnel had shredded her legs, understanding her flying career was probably over, all the explanations felt hollow. I'm sorry, she said instead, because that was the only truth that mattered. I'm so sorry, Maya. You deserved a mother who was there, and I kept leaving. I kept choosing missions over you, and I told myself it was for good reasons, but really I was just. She trailed off, trying to find words for something she hadn't wanted to examine too closely. I was trying to feel close to your father, to understand why he kept deploying, why he couldn't quit even when we asked him to. and I ended up doing exactly what he did, pushing away the people I loved, because the mission felt more real than normal life. Maya was crying openly now, years of held feelings breaking through the dam she'd built to protect herself. "I don't want you to be like Dad," she said. "I want you to be here. I want a mother who comes home, who keeps her promises, who doesn't make me wonder every time she leaves if this is the time she doesn't come back." "Okay," Victoria said simply. "Okay, I'm done. No more missions, no more Valkyrie. I'm going to be here for you, however long it takes to prove I mean it." She meant it in that moment. Meant it through the painful months of rehabilitation, learning to walk again on legs held together with hardware and stubbornness. Meant it when Garza visited, and she told him she was retiring from Task Force Reaper, that someone else would have to be the pilot they called when situations became impossible. She meant it every time Maya helped her through physical therapy, every parent-teacher conference she attended, every promise she kept that proved she was choosing family over the brotherhood. But meaning something and sustaining it were different skills, and Victoria had spent 5 years cultivating abilities that didn't translate to civilian life. Physical therapy couldn't occupy her mind the way mission planning had. Maya's college applications felt trivial compared to coordinating hostage rescues. The quiet house echoed with absence, not just James anymore, but also the missions, the purpose, the sense of being essential to outcomes that mattered. 6 months into retirement, Victoria started checking her phone compulsively, waiting for calls that didn't come because she'd told Garza to take her off the roster. She watched news reports about international incidents and wondered who was flying the missions she'd have been assigned to, whether they were as good as she'd been, whether anyone had died because Valkyrie wasn't there. The guilt worked both directions now. Guilt about the missions she'd flown and the promises she'd broken. Guilt about the missions she wasn't flying and the people she'd let down. Maya noticed, because children always noticed when parents struggled. They fought about it carefully, Maya trying to give her mother space to figure things out, Victoria trying to hide how much she missed being someone other than a rehabilitating veteran with declining skills. "You should call them," Maya said finally, one evening while they pretended to watch television neither was actually seeing. "Call Chief Garza. Tell him you want back in." "I promised you." "You promised you'd be here," Maya interrupted. "And you are. You've been here every day for 6 months. You've kept every promise. But Mom, you're miserable. You're trying so hard to be normal that you've forgotten normal was never who you were. You're Valkyrie. That's not something you can just stop being." Victoria wanted to argue, to say that being a good mother meant sacrificing the things that made her feel alive, that parenthood required putting your child's needs above everything else. But Maya was looking at her with James's eyes, seeing through the rationalizations to the truth underneath. "Your father would have hated me doing this," Victoria said quietly. "Being gone all the time, risking my life for missions that officially don't exist. He would have wanted me to stay home, stay safe." "Dad spent 15 years deploying to places that tried to kill him," Maya pointed out. "He never stayed home or safe. And you know what he told me before his last deployment? I was 6, but I remember. He said being safe wasn't the same as being useful, that some people were built to run toward danger instead of away from it. He said Grandma never understood why he kept going back, but he hoped when I grew up I would." "You're 16, Victoria said, but her voice cracked. "And I understand," Maya said firmly. "I don't like it, I hate worrying about you. But I understand that you need to be Valkyrie the same way Dad needed to be a SEAL. So call them, tell them you're coming back. But this time," she took her mother's hand. "This time don't pretend you're not. Don't lie to me about contractor work or civilian operations. Tell me the truth. Tell me you're going to fly dangerous missions with people who need you to survive, and that sometimes you might not come home. I can handle that better than I can handle watching you pretend you're happy when you're not." Victoria pulled her daughter into a hug, feeling her height. When had Maya gotten so tall? And her strength, emotional and physical. Somewhere in the last year, her daughter had grown up enough to understand complicated truths, to make peace with a mother who wasn't conventional but was hers. "I'll call Garza tomorrow," Victoria promised. "But I need you to know, you're more important than any mission. If it ever comes down to choosing between being here for you and being Valkyrie, I choose you. Always." "I know," Maya said. "That's why you can go back, because I know you'll always come home if you can." The next day, Victoria called Garza. "I'm cleared for flight status," she said without preamble. "Physical therapy complete, doctors say I'm good to go. If you still need a pilot who can fly impossible missions, Valkyrie's available." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Victoria thought maybe the connection had dropped. Then Garza's voice came back, rough with emotion he usually suppressed. "We've needed you," he said simply. "Welcome back." Oming back felt like coming home, which should have worried Victoria more than it did. The classified community had continued without her. New missions executed, new operators added to teams, the endless war machine grinding forward regardless of any individual's absence. But people remembered Valkyrie. When she walked into briefings, conversations stopped and heads turned, not with hostility but with recognition. The pilot who'd flown them through impossible situations. The legend who'd taken a RPG and survived. The operator who'd chosen family over the brotherhood, then chose to return because sometimes you could have both. Garza brought her back carefully, starting with training missions that verified her skills hadn't degraded during rehabilitation. She flew every aircraft type Reaper used, demonstrated proficiency in challenging conditions, proved that whatever damage the RPG had done to her legs hadn't affected her ability to pilot. The physical limitations were there. She moved more carefully now, needed more time to stretch before and after flights, carried pain medication for the days her hardware bothered her. But in the cockpit, she was still Valkyrie. The first mission back was deliberately low risk, transporting a diplomatic team into Pakistan's tribal regions, landing at a secured site, waiting while they conducted meetings, then flying them back out. No combat, no extraction under fire, just professional aviation work that happened to be classified. Victoria executed it flawlessly and, more importantly, came home to have dinner with Maya afterward. They developed new patterns. Breakfast together before Victoria left for missions when possible, texts during operations when secure communications allowed it, honest conversations about risks and fears when Victoria returned. "How was work?" Maya would ask, and Victoria would answer honestly within security constraints. "Flew some people to a meeting. Weather was challenging, but we made it fine." Or "Extraction mission went longer than expected. Lost a lot of sleep, but everyone came home." The truth, or as close to it as classification allowed, letting Maya into the reality of what Valkyrie meant without drowning her in operational details. Gradually, the missions escalated. Garza trusted Victoria with more complex operations, and she proved worthy of that trust. Reconnaissance flights along borders that would spark international incidents if discovered. Insertions into territories where capture meant torture and execution. Extractions of assets from situations that had collapsed into chaos. Each mission added to Valkyrie's legend, but more importantly, each mission Victoria survived added to the account of promises kept to Maya. The balance wasn't perfect. No balance ever was when military service tangled with family obligations. Victoria missed school events sometimes, had to cancel vacation plans when emergency missions developed, spent nights awake calculating risk because she'd promised Maya she wouldn't die stupidly. But the honesty made the difference. Maya knew what her mother did, understood its importance, accepted the trade-offs because they'd negotiated them together. Years passed this way, Victoria aging from her 40s into her 50s, while Maya grew into an adult who chose to study international relations because she'd grown up watching her mother try to make broken things less broken. The career progression that had defined Victoria's younger life, ranks and promotions and official recognition, didn't apply to someone whose work couldn't be acknowledged. She remained officially a civilian contractor, while unofficially being the pilot task force Reaper called when missions needed someone with more experience than should legally exist. "You know you're training your replacement," Garza said one evening after a mission debrief. They were drinking coffee in a safe house outside Kabul, the war having circled back to where it started, eternal in its futility. "Eventually, age is going to catch you, Valkyrie. Reflexes slow, decision-making gets cautious. Better to pick your successor than have the work pick one for you." Victoria had thought about this. 53 years old, carrying injuries that made every cold morning a reminder of mortality. How much longer could she do this? How many more impossible missions before the impossible caught up with her? "Do you have someone in mind?" she asked. "3 candidates," Garza said. "All good pilots, all combat tested. But they're not you. They're technically proficient, but they don't have the instinct, the ability to read a situation and know what needs to happen before anyone else sees it. That's what makes you Valkyrie. That's what I need you to teach them." Training her replacement became Victoria's final mission, though she didn't think of it that way initially. The 3 candidates rotated through operations with her, flying as co-pilots or observers, learning not just how to pilot but how to think like Valkyrie. She taught them risk assessment that went beyond textbook calculations, showed them how to read terrain and weather and enemy capabilities simultaneously, demonstrated the 1,000 small decisions that separated adequate pilots from exceptional ones. 2 of the candidates were good. They'd have long, successful careers flying for whoever needed pilots willing to work in classified spaces. But the third, Captain Jennifer Red Hawk Martinez, Army aviator with combat deployments in 3 continents, had something more. The instinct Garza had described, the ability to see 3 moves ahead and adjust before situations deteriorated. Victoria recognized it because it was what she'd been 20 years and countless missions ago. "You're going to be Valkyrie when I retire," Victoria told her after a particularly complex mission where Red Hawk had made decisions that saved the operation from collapsing. "That's not a request or a compliment. That's a statement of fact. This organization needs someone who can fly these missions, and you're capable of it." Red Hawk looked uncertain in a way good operators rarely showed. "Ma'am, Valkyrie's a legend. I can't be that." "You don't become the legend," Victoria corrected. "You become yourself, carrying the name forward. Valkyrie isn't about being me. It's about being the pilot who shows up when situations are impossible, who brings people home when no one else can. You've already done that. The call sign just makes it official." The formal transfer happened without ceremony, because classified operations didn't do ceremony. One day Victoria was Valkyrie. The next day she'd pass the mantle to Red Hawk and become simply Commander Cress again, retired operator serving in advisory capacities. Garza threw her a small gathering, just the core team who'd worked with her for 15 years, and they told stories that would never appear in any official history. James's missions, the Mi-8 infiltration in Afghanistan, Yemen and Syria and Nigeria, the rescue operations and reconnaissance flights and insertions that had defined 2 decades of wars fought in shadows. "To Valkyrie," Garza toasted, lifting a glass, "who carried us through impossible missions and brought us home more times than we deserved. May her successor live up to the standard she set." They drank, and Victoria felt the weight of the call sign lift from her shoulders, passed to someone younger and capable and ready to carry it forward. It felt right, this ending that wasn't really an ending but rather a transition. Valkyrie would continue, wearing a different face but serving the same purpose. The work would go on because the work always went on. Wars and missions and impossible situations requiring people willing to risk everything to protect strangers who'd never know their names. Maya attended the gathering despite it being classified, granted temporary clearance, because Garza had argued that Victoria's daughter deserved to see her mother honored by people who understood what she'd sacrificed. They didn't explain the specific missions. Those stayed classified. But Maya saw the respect in how these hard men treated her mother, heard the stories about professionalism under pressure, understood in ways civilians never could that Victoria had been extraordinary at something most people didn't know existed. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Maya said during the drive home. Simple words that meant everything. "I know I haven't always understood, and I know I gave you grief about leaving, but I'm proud of what you did, who you became. Dad would have been proud too." Victoria had to pull over because tears made driving unsafe. All these years, she'd been chasing James's ghost, trying to understand his choices by making similar ones, seeking connection to her dead husband through the brotherhood he'd loved. But maybe she'd had it backwards. Maybe James had been trying to be worthy of her, the pilot who could fly through hell, the woman who'd stolen his heart with competence and courage. Maybe they'd both been extraordinary, each in their own way, and their tragedy was dying before they could fully appreciate what they'd found in each other. "Thank you," Victoria said when she could speak again, "for understanding, for letting me be both your mother and Valkyrie, for being strong enough to handle a parent who kept leaving but always came home." "You're here now," Maya said. "That's what matters." Retirement lasted 3 years before Victoria admitted she was terrible at it. She tried civilian life, consulting work that bored her, senseless, volunteer aviation instruction that didn't scratch the itch for meaningful missions, travel that felt empty without operational purpose. She stayed involved with Maya, who'd graduated college and started working for an international relief organization, probably influenced by growing up around parents who'd spent careers trying to make bad situations less bad. But the restless energy that had driven Victoria through 2 decades of combat operations didn't translate to peaceful existence. Garza called periodically with updates she didn't strictly need. Red Hawk was doing well, executing missions with the same excellence Victoria had shown. Task Force Reaper continued its ghost war, operators deployed to situations that required deniability and precision. The world kept producing crises that needed addressing through channels that couldn't be acknowledged. Sometimes Garza's updates included offers, temporary missions requiring Victoria's specific expertise, training opportunities with new operators, advisory roles that kept her connected to the community. Victoria accepted some, declined others, trying to find balance between who she'd been and who she was becoming. The honest truth was that she missed it, missed the clarity of combat missions where objectives were defined and success measurable, missed the brotherhood of people who understood operational necessity, missed being Valkyrie, though she'd never admit it because that call sign belonged to Red Hawk now. Then the Syria mission went wrong, and everything changed. The call came from Garza, his voice carrying tension Victoria hadn't heard in years. "Red Hawk's down," he said without preamble. "Mechanical failure during insertion, hard landing in hostile territory. She survived the crash, but she's injured and pinned down. Syrian forces converging on her position. We're mounting a rescue but—" He trailed off and Victoria heard what he wasn't saying. "But you need a pilot with experience in that specific terrain who knows how to fly extractions under fire," Victoria finished. "Someone who's done it before and survived." "I need Valkyrie," Garza said simply. "The original. I know you're retired. I know I've got no right to ask. But she's one of ours and she's in trouble because she was trying to be what you were. If there's any chance—" "What's the timeline?" Victoria interrupted, already moving toward her closet where the go-bag stayed packed despite 3 years of civilian life. 12 hours before they overrun her position. Garza's relief came through the phone. "Aircraft staged at Incirlik. Same approach vectors you used last time. But Victoria, this is the last one. You pull this off, then you're done for real. No more missions, no more calls. You've earned that." "Let's get Red Hawk home," Victoria said. "Then we'll discuss retirement." The flight to Turkey felt like time travel, returning to bases and routes she'd flown countless times. Different aircraft, technology had advanced even in 3 years, but the same mission profile. Insertion into Syria, navigate to a downed pilot's position, extract under fire, return before international incidents developed. The kind of operation Valkyrie had made routine through repetition and excellence. But Victoria wasn't the same pilot who'd done this before. 56 years old now, carrying injuries that made pre-flight stretching essential, wearing reading glasses to study maps that had once been memorized instantly. She compensated with experience, knew the terrain intimately, understood Syrian air defense patterns, could anticipate complications before they developed. Age had taken edge but added wisdom, and wisdom kept you alive when reflexes slowed. The border crossing happened in darkness, Victoria flying low and fast, following valleys she'd mapped into memory years ago. Elena monitored from Operations Center, her voice unchanged despite years past, still providing updates in the calm, professional tone that made dangerous situations feel manageable. Red Hawk's position is holding but deteriorating, Elena reported. She's injured but mobile, combat effective, successfully defending her position against probing attacks. Syrian forces are gathering for a major assault at dawn. You've got maybe 90 minutes. Victoria pushed the helicopter faster, feeling the aircraft respond with power that made her old birds feel primitive. Technology had advanced, but the mission remained eternal. Locate the downed pilot, extract them before the enemy could, return everyone home alive. Garza's team was aboard, silent professionals who'd trust Victoria with their lives because Valkyrie didn't leave people behind. The crash site appeared ahead, marked by IR strobes and the burning wreckage of Red Hawk's bird. Victoria brought her helicopter in fast, flaring hard to bleed speed, touching down in terrain that barely qualified as a landing zone. Garza's team was out instantly, securing perimeter while Victoria maintained position at the controls. Red Hawk, Garza was calling, moving toward a defensive position Red Hawk had established in the crashed helicopter's shadow. Victoria watched through night vision, saw the younger pilot emerge from cover, moving with a limp but carrying her rifle, still fighting despite being injured and alone in hostile territory. They loaded her aboard quickly, professionals recognizing when time mattered more than caution. Red Hawk's face showed pain and exhaustion and relief, the expression of someone who'd been certain they would die here but was being given another chance. "Thanks for the rescue," Red Hawk said as Victoria lifted off, banking away from the crash site. "Didn't expect them to call you out of retirement." "Valkyrie doesn't retire," Victoria replied. "We just pass the name to someone worthy. You earned that name and we take care of our own." The extraction went smoothly, almost suspiciously smoothly. No pursuit or SAM launches, just clean flying through familiar terrain until they crossed into Turkish airspace and safety. Maybe they'd gotten lucky. Maybe Syrian forces had been caught off guard. Or maybe the universe had decided to give Victoria one last mission that didn't require her to fly through impossible situations and survive by pure will. At Incirlik, medical personnel took charge of Red Hawk, while Victoria shut down the aircraft and completed post-flight checks with the thoroughness that had kept her alive through 20 years of combat operations. Garza appeared beside the helicopter, looking tired but satisfied, the expression of a man who'd gotten his people home again. "That's it," he said. "You're done, for real this time. No more emergencies that pull you back in. You've earned actual retirement." Victoria nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. She was done. Not because she couldn't keep flying, she probably could for a few more years if needed, but because Red Hawk would recover and resume being Valkyrie, and the name didn't need two pilots wearing it. The torch had been passed, then temporarily reclaimed, and now was being passed again with finality. "Tell me about James," Garza said suddenly. "Tell me what you want people to remember about him." The question caught Victoria off guard. "Why now?" "Because we're old," Garza said simply. "Because guys from James's generation are dying, not in combat but from age and injuries that catch up eventually. Because someone needs to remember them before everyone who knew them is gone. So tell me, what made Lieutenant Commander James Cress someone worth remembering? Victoria thought about her husband, dead 20 years now, his face fading from memory despite photographs kept sharp. He loved his team more than he loved safety, she said finally. He believed that protecting people from darkness required walking into it yourself. He was funny and smart and terrible at cooking, but tried anyway because he wanted to contribute. He called me his co-pilot in life, even though we flew different aircraft. She paused, feeling tears that didn't fall because she'd cried them all years ago. And when he died, he did it protecting his guys. That's what he'd want remembered, not that he died, but that his team made it home because he stayed. Garza nodded slowly. We'll remember, he promised. All of us who flew with Valkyrie, who knew James, who benefited from what you both sacrificed. We'll tell the stories, even the classified ones, to people who need to hear them. That's how warriors live forever, through the stories other warriors tell. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd spent years in proximity to violence, watching sunrise paint the base in colors that promised new beginnings. Somewhere in the distance, jets took off for training missions, the sound of American military power projecting itself across an unstable world. The work continued. It always continued. But for Victoria, for Valkyrie the original, it was finally time to step back and let someone else carry the weight. What will you do now? Garza asked. Victoria smiled. Go home, she said. Be Maya's mom without qualifications or divided attention. Maybe write a book that can't be published for 50 years. Maybe just sit on my porch and watch birds without wondering if I should be flying missions. Normal person things. You were never normal, Garza pointed out. No, Victoria agreed. But maybe I can learn. Learning to be normal took longer than Victoria expected, but she approached it with the same determination she'd brought to impossible missions. She moved to a small house near Maya's apartment, close enough to see her daughter regularly but far enough to give them both space. She adopted a dog, something she couldn't have done during active duty, and discovered the simple pleasure of daily walks that required no tactical awareness, just companionship and fresh air. Maya visited weekly, and they fell into patterns Victoria had missed building during years of deployments. Sunday dinners where they cooked together, Victoria finally mastering her husband's puzzle recipe after 2 decades of avoiding it. Movie nights where they watched films that didn't involve military operations or international crises. Conversations about Maya's work, relationships, life plans, the normal concerns of someone building adult identity without war defining their background. You seem happy, Maya observed one evening. Actually happy, not performing happy while thinking about missions. Victoria considered this. Was she happy, or just finally at peace with being done? I miss flying, she admitted. Miss the clarity of knowing exactly what needs to be done and having the skills to do it. But I don't miss the wait. Don't miss wondering if each mission might be the last, or calculating odds of coming home, or trying to explain to you why I had to leave again. You were good at it, Maya said. Being Valkyrie, people are alive because you answered when they called. And I'm alive because I stopped answering, Victoria replied. That balance matters too. Time passed in the way it does when life becomes routine, weeks blurring into months, seasons changing, the world continuing its complicated existence without requiring Victoria's intervention. She stayed loosely connected to the community, attending occasional reunions with operators she'd flown with, memorial services for brothers killed in operations that remained classified. The stories got told at these gatherings, warriors preserving their history through oral tradition, because written records couldn't capture truth. At one such gathering, 5 years after her final mission, Victoria found herself talking with a young pilot assigned to what Task Force Reaper had evolved into. The organizations kept renaming themselves, shuffling designations to maintain deniability, but the work remained constant. This pilot, call sign Phantom, had heard legends about Valkyrie but wasn't sure what was real versus what was embellishment. Did you really fly a Russian helicopter into enemy territory while impersonating their pilot? Phantom asked, skepticism evident despite respectful tone. I did, Victoria confirmed. Afghanistan, 20 years ago. Painted bird to match their supply helicopter, studied their radio protocols, flew right into their compound. Worked perfectly until they launched a surface-to-air missile at us during the extraction. How'd you survive that? Victoria smiled. Better question is how'd I survive 20 years of missions like that? And the answer isn't skill or training, though those helped. The answer is that I stayed terrified. Fear kept me careful. The moment you start believing you're invincible is the moment you stop properly assessing risk. I was scared during every mission, and that fear kept me alive. Phantom absorbed this, young enough to think fear was weakness, not experienced enough yet to understand it was survival. Any advice, he asked, for someone trying to build a career in this world? Victoria thought about James, about Garza, about 2 decades of missions that had carved her into something stronger and scarcer than she'd been before. Remember why you're doing this, she said finally. Not the adrenaline or the challenge or the elite status, but the actual why, the people you're protecting, the difference you make when you succeed. When missions get hard and you're exhausted and scared, that why is what keeps you going. That's what made me Valkyrie, not flying skill. Understanding, I was there to bring people home. The conversation stayed with Victoria long after the reunion ended. She'd become something she'd never intended, a legend, a story told to teach lessons, a name invoked when describing impossible missions. Valkyrie had transcended Victoria Cress, becoming larger than any individual pilot. Red Hawk wore the call sign now, and someday would pass it to someone else, and the name would continue carrying weight even after everyone who'd known the original was dead. There was comfort in that. James lived on through the stories Garza's team told. Victoria would live on through the pilots who inherited Valkyrie. Their daughter would carry forward whatever she'd learned from parents who'd spent careers in service of objectives that mattered more than personal safety. Legacy wasn't about being remembered personally. It was about the values you instilled, the standards you maintained, the example you provided for whoever came next. Maya got engaged that year to someone working in humanitarian logistics who'd never seen combat but understood service in his own way. Victoria watched her daughter plan a wedding, navigating family dynamics and vendor negotiations with the same competence she brought to coordinating relief supplies in crisis zones. James would have loved him, Victoria thought. Would have appreciated someone who understood that loving someone in this line of work required patience and flexibility, and accepting that sometimes the person you loved chose strangers over family, because that's what the mission required. I want you to walk me down the aisle, Maya said during planning. I know traditionally it's fathers, but Dad's not here and you are. You've always been here, even when you were deployed somewhere I couldn't know about. I want you standing with me when I take this next step. Victoria cried, which happened more easily now that adrenaline didn't suppress emotions for tactical necessity. I'd be honored, she said. Your father would be so proud of who you became. He'd be proud of you too, Maya said. Proud you survived, proud you kept going after he died, proud you became Valkyrie. Even if it meant missing some of my life, even if it was hard. I understand now what you were doing, why it mattered. And I'm proud of you too, Mom. The wedding happened on a perfect autumn day, leaves turning colors that reminded Victoria of sunrises seen from helicopter cockpits over distant mountains. She walked Maya down the aisle wearing dress blues she'd kept maintained despite civilian status, medals representing classified operations pinned to her chest in patterns that meant nothing to most attendees, but everything to the few who recognized Task Force Reaper decorations. Garza attended, along with Preacher and several other operators from the early missions. They wore suits but moved like warriors, clustering together in that way combat veterans did at civilian events. Red Hawk came too, young and confident, wearing Valkyrie's call sign with the same pride Victoria once had. They talked briefly, comparing notes on aircraft and missions, older and younger generation of the same legacy sharing space peacefully. "Thank you for what you built," Red Hawk said, "for creating something worth inheriting. I'm trying to honor it every mission." "You honor it by surviving," Victoria replied. "By bringing people home, by staying scared enough to stay careful. The rest takes care of itself." After the wedding, after Maya had departed for honeymoon with her new husband, after the gathering had dispersed and returned to whatever corners of the world they operated from, Victoria sat alone in her house with her dog and felt something she hadn't felt in 30 years of military service and classified operations. She felt complete, not finished. She'd keep living, keep being Maya's mother, keep maintaining connections to the community that had defined her identity. But complete in the sense that she'd done what needed doing, survived what should have killed her, and could finally rest without guilt or restlessness pulling her back toward danger. James's photo still sat on the mantel, but now it was surrounded by pictures of Maya's wedding, of grandchildren that might eventually arrive, of life that continued flowing forward despite losses and scars. The rock James had sent from Afghanistan remained on Maya's childhood dresser, now stored in Victoria's house, gray stone shot through with quartz veins like the mountains where he'd died. Victoria picked up the rock, feeling its weight, remembering the husband who'd promised to bring their daughter something from distant mountains. He'd kept his promise, just like Victoria had kept hers, to survive, to honor his memory, to raise Maya into someone strong enough to understand why parents sometimes chose missions over family. "We did good," Victoria said to the photo, to the rock, to the ghost that had haunted her for 20 years. "Maya's happy, safe, loved. Your team came home more times than they should have, and Valkyrie lives on, carrying warriors through impossible situations. We did good, James. You can rest now." And so could she. Finally, completely, without reservation. Victoria Cress, call sign Valkyrie, had served her time, paid her debts, and earned the peace that came from knowing you'd lived according to principles that mattered. The work continued, would always continue, but someone else would carry it forward now. She was done, and in being done, she'd achieved something more valuable than any medal or commendation. She'd come home, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, completely. She'd come home to herself, to her daughter, to the life she'd fought to protect through 2 decades of impossible missions. Valkyrie had finally landed, and in the quiet of her house, surrounded by memories and hope and the simple presence of a dog who loved her unconditionally, Victoria closed her eyes and rested.